Hello and welcome back to the Alizee show, second take. We have a slightly different one. This time we're doing a Zoom interview because my guest is Gloria Masters. She is from New Zealand. She is a child sex trafficking and abuse survivor and author. Hi, Gloria. How are you again?
Hi, great. Great, Alizee, we're doing it.
We love technology. It's amazing. I can speak to someone all the way in New Zealand, but computer freaks out if you try and record.
But we're there. We're going to make it happen. Yay. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for your eternal patience whilst we have technical difficulties. So a little bit about Gloria from the age of, since you're born basically until 16, horrific abuse. So viewer discretion is advised. I'll give more of a disclaimer before the video actually starts. We are going to be touching on some heavy subjects. So yeah, let's do this again. So from a very early age, you were abused by your father.
Yes.
Yes.
So, yeah. And from the time I was born until I was 16, and I no longer had to see him. But that was pretty much 16 years of horrendous child sexual abuse, trafficking, leased to gangs, rented out at sex parties, made over 100 videos where I was the star performer, where adult men, women, and children were involved at times. Got prostituted out of a nightclub in Auckland red light district between the age of 11 and 16, and had many abortions forced on me at my grandmother's hands. So yes, very, very dark, dreadful time in my young life.
So why speak about it now? Obviously, I know why it's important to have your story out, but why now?
Okay, well, that's a really useful question. So it took me decades to heal and recover from this. And the final stage of healing is where you can start to give back. And 3 years ago, I began writing my first book, which is On Angel's Wings, My Flight from Trauma to Grace, which details what I went through. The reason I felt I could do it then was because I had healed enough to do it. But you know what my main purpose is? To actually help other child sexual abuse survivors by shining light on this topic through love and humility, actually. So that's my real purpose. And it's because it affects so many of us out there, and it's a silent endemic, not just here in Aotearoa, but out across the world.
Yeah, we spoke about this briefly, but you have the statistics on how many people this issue affects. So across the world, what are the statistics on child sexual abuse?
So I've been told police in New Zealand tell me that they have a report that suggests up to 1 in 3 adults have experienced some form of child sexual abuse. So let's just digest that. 1 in 3. And I'm just not talking women. I'm talking male survivors, our beautiful male survivors out there who struggle so much and find it so hard to share their stories because of the huge shame attached. And it's just wrong, Alizee. We need more focus given to this. We need more support and resource for our 1 in 3. And that's why I'm standing up and sharing my story, just so it can be a platform actually to expose what child sex abuse is doing out across the world.
Yes, because I suppose sexual abuse of all sorts, children and adults, does go vastly unreported because of the shame
Yes.
elements and the
Yes.
guilt attached. So in your position, how did you start to get over the shame?
Well, that's an interesting one, and I just want to talk about that for a minute. With child sexual abuse, adult survivors find it difficult to speak for 3 reasons. One, this all began in secrecy.
Mm-hmm.
2, the silence was ensured because of the threats made against us should we ever speak. And 3, the shame then rendered us incapacitated and unable to speak. And we carry that shame, and to me, it takes the gold. It's just the most horrendous, big kind of weight, if you like, that we carry around on our shoulders. You know, the average age for CSA, child sexual abuse survivors, to speak out is 52. So, Alizee, think about that. How many years of your adult life are wasted through carrying this trauma around through shame? Shame is what keeps us quiet.
Yeah, and we saw that in England, especially with the Jimmy Savile case after he passed away. It came out, well, hundreds of people came out, and they would all be in their 40s and maybe 50s.
Yes.
Is the system, I know the answer for this, but is the system failing people? Because if it's affecting up to 1 in 3 people, child sexual abuse, is there not enough services in place to help with such a, because if there's 8 billion people on the planet, that's a lot of people being
Yes.
abused. Is there just not enough manpower, police power, child support power? What's going on there?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Look, and I think it's multifaceted. I think there's many streams to this, but they all end up down the path of shut up. So what happens is survivors start to talk. Now, it's not uncommon then to feel shamed and re-traumatized because people don't want to hear this. Why don't they want to hear it? Because it's uncomfortable or depressing. But what they don't realize is when they're shutting us down because it's uncomfortable, we're giving the pedophiles a free pass because it ensures the silence, secrecy, and shame all over again. And I think we just need to find our voices, even if it's just at one person, and start to share, because every time we do, we're handing the shame back to the abusers.
I'm just thinking again of the Jimmy Savile case. I'm wondering if the internet has helped people find their voices, because before, with Savile in particular, sorry, it's fresh on my mind because there's new documentaries and stuff coming and the like coming out about him. Back then, when people tried to go to the police, they were ignored, shut down, or told that this isn't going to be able to get into court, it's not going to go far. But now we have the internet where people can talk on forums. Actually, it's just came out in the press recently that a famous DJ over here has been accused of sexual misconduct and assault by lots of young women. And I'm wondering, is the internet helping people find their voices in this matter? Whereas before, they could only go to the police, and then if they were shut down, no one else is going to hear it, apart from maybe rumors that Savile's not going good or other people are up to no good. So have you found that the internet has definitely helped with you?
Yeah, I do think so. I think what happens is it's another forum for people. And I know doing podcasts like this, thank you, it means you've got a fair percentage of your audience actually who have experienced something. Mm-hmm. And it gives them permission to think, yes, that's happened to me as well. And so that's what I like about this, because the more we share, the more we can hand the shame back. And actually, I've created a podcast channel called Handing the Shame Back. Mm-hmm. And that's for survivors of child sexual abuse, so that I interview them or have uplifting blogs on there for people so that they feel less alone and more supported. Because we really, this is having such a big impact in lots of ways. So, when you think about trauma and the impact, for instance, up to 50% of suicides in our country can be connected back to childhood trauma, which tends to contain child sexual abuse. So think about that, up to 50% can be connected to some form of childhood trauma. So there's something. Another statistic, you would think that the war vets, Vietnam vets, had by far the highest percentage of PTSD. No, 70% of post-traumatic stress disorder is found in CSA survivors.
Is there a support system in New Zealand for this type of thing? Is there like social services or?
Well, we do have lots of people who are trying individually, as I am, to support and help. But one thing we do also have in New Zealand is we have what's called Accident Compensation Commission, ACC. And what they do is they provide counselling, free counselling to survivors of this. So it's called the Sensitive Claims Unit. And I just love New Zealand for that. Thank you for that, New Zealand, because you don't have to name who your abuser was. You don't have to get the funding to choose a counsellor on lots of details about it. It's taken as read that if you contact them and you need support, you can get an ACC registered counsellor, and 6 sessions, I think, minimum are paid for. So that's pretty cool. I think the wider issue is that out among the average New Zealander is it's not that they don't believe, Alizee, it's just they don't want to believe this goes on.
Yeah, you hear that a lot. You do hear a lot of, but surely, this wouldn't happen, or people would do that, because you want to think that when you have the police, most of which are, pro-fine people, you'd want to think you'd be able to go and speak to them if a crime happens. You'd want to believe that politicians who are elected by the people would be reliable on this type of thing. But as I was just saying to you before, we have a case in England of some MPs. Reports came out that there were 1 or 2 MPs who were engaging in this type of abuse, but the government made an official statement. This was several years ago. I remember Russell Brand speaking about this. That's where I got my news from. Russell Brand, this comedian in the UK turned like speaker and activist.
Yes.
Yes. This report came out saying it's not in the public interest to know the names of these MPs, and it'll probably come out in 50 years' time where, the people affected might not be alive anymore. I'm wondering, is it a bit similar in New Zealand?
Yeah, I guess, I would say that definitely high up in the, politicians, police, government, this sort of thing goes on. And there's almost like a green light for it too. And I'll tell you why, because we've had some statewide commissions held into, Lake Alice, which was a home for wayward children, they called them back in the day. And these children were just repetitively abused and tortured by the state carers. And these were Catholic brothers and nuns and all sorts involved. So, I think at the end of the day, there's a little bit of a myth out there that it doesn't happen at our highest levels. Yes, it does. And unfortunately, it doesn't mean every person at a high level is behaving in this way, but it does mean that as you've found over there, there are MPs who, they can abuse children and they get away with it? What does that tell you?
I mean, with our very own royal family, all of I have to say for legal reasons, but I'm going to say of an eye roll, the accusations surrounding Prince Andrew, one of the most elite positions of power you can be in the UK. The royal family still hold like the power of veto, I believe, and they're very much they don't hold as much power as they used to, but it's the most privileged position you can be in, to be born into the royal family in England anyway. And so when you have at least one member of the family going around doing that, and then you start to connect the dots and you see Epstein, friends of many of the rich and famous, had his own island where unspeakable trauma was happening to lots of children.
Oh, yeah. Pedo Island.
Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? And then it's quite unfathomable, but we can see all this stuff in the mainstream media and the news, and people still want to think, oh, but surely it can't really be happening. You know, it's very frustrating.
It's really sad. It's really sad, and there's 12 million reasons why Prince Andrew never got to court, because I converted what was paid out to your currency. But the point being, think about it this way: if a child has been abused, they will be acting out in some way. Mm-hmm. What happens when they're ignored or shamed or put down or told to behave is they then become seen as the difficult one. So that no one ever asks, what happened to you? You okay? What's going on? It's just a discipline or a decision made to put that child or teenager into a box of, oh, she or he's always been difficult. But actually, that's why they're not taken seriously. But the point is, we should be rewinding the tape and going back to what's happened to you.
Yeah. Did you find that, because for you it started in family, the abuse of your father?
Yes. Yes.
Did you find that? Did you go to, I guess, preschool, kindergarten, like, when you're 5, 6 years old? Did you?
We went to school at age 5. Yeah, that's when we started in New Zealand. Yeah.
And were you acting out at that age due to
out of control at school? Why? Because school was my only safe place. Mm-hmm. They couldn't hurt me there, so I was free to release, and I had to release somehow. But no one ever asked what's going on. And that was,
if you get labelled as a problem child, then it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, because again, not to bang on about Savile, but he had access to, I think it's called the Duncroft School for Girls, and it was like misbehaving girls, so they're sent off to a private boarding school, where then the cycle of abuse continues, because abusers will do that, won't they? They'll go for children or people that seem vulnerable and who'll be easier to isolate, so they can't talk to others. And if they do talk to others, they're not going to be taken seriously because, oh, well, you've always been trouble, you've always been an attention seeker, all this type of rhetoric.
So you can see how the cycle continues. But if we took that right back to why is the child needing to be placed in that home, if the question was asked of the child or parents who cared about that child, there might have been some different outcomes. And I think we have to have a bit of a do-over actually in how we decide on whether someone's being naughty or whether actually it's a cry for help. Because children who are being abused will never speak. It's too hard for them. There's too many threats made, and it's such a shameful thing to carry. And I think too, and you and I had talked about this earlier, Alizee, the reason we stay quiet is because it starts in secrecy. Mm-hmm. The whole act starts in secrecy. Then silence renders us just afraid to speak because of the threats. And they may not be made against us, but if we speak, your dog will be killed, or your sister or your mother, you know, that sort of stuff. And as small children, we believe that, don't we? Or even as teenagers, we believe that. And then the shame is what keeps us silent and quiet for so long.
Yeah, and I've also seen examples of people's life experiences where if they were being abused by a primary caregiver, the threat was more of a, I don't want to, it like, it didn't come from this place of, oh, violence will happen. It came from a place of, but if you tell people this is our little secret and I do this because I love you, and
Yes.
you know, if you tell people, then I'll be taken away. And the child at that point might have
Yes.
some sort of, so, well, I don't know, it's normal for children to be very attached to their
Yeah.
primary caregivers
Yeah.
anyway, you know.
Yeah.
But for
Yeah,
you,
no, that was never the case with me, because
yeah.
I wasn't loved. I was seen as an object, and I never once in all my childhood, adolescence, never once did my father reach out to discuss anything about life with me, or give me any guidance or protection or interest, or, you know, show me how to be the best child I could be. All he ever talked about or chose to do was to traffic me and sell me out. And so it's really hard to have a good sense of self, because as a small girl, it's not until we're 8 years old that our self-esteem is formed. But daughters and small girls see themselves through their daddy's eyes. And so, you know, how could there be self-love or self-esteem?
Yeah, and your mother was also very vacant, wasn't she? She was very absent.
Yeah.
So,
And, you know, abandonment is a term I would use. And I was just in her way. If you said to me, how did I feel growing up around my mother? I just always felt in the way. I was a nuisance. And no one ever saw the joy in me, or the light in me, or the, you know, the fun in me. It was just, yeah.
yeah, and I'm thinking if, you know, from one caregiver, you're just getting horrific abuse and the other is gone. So you've got abandonment.
Yeah.
You must have never experienced like physical affection, like, you know, just a hug. And I'm wondering, how did that affect you becoming an adult? I know that we spoke about this previously, that your brain, as a way to protect itself, repressed, disassociated from the memories of childhood. But did you find as an adult, how did that affect you?
The fact that I was never physically loved, you
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Or,
because
yeah.
it's important for like for children to, because it's a comfort thing for starters, like, you know,
Yes,
for
of
parents to be
course it is.
protective.
So there was a family dog that we had. So that dog got loved to bits. Um, and yes, there were no safe adults ever in my life. Up until the age of 16, there was no one I could trust. So I had to do what I needed to. But before I get to that, let's talk about what you mentioned, which is that dissociation.
Yeah.
And I think we likened it, what CSA, child sexual abuse survivors, do is we dissociate, which we leave our bodies. And we do that, Alizee, to keep us safe, because our mind can't comprehend and wants to protect. So in my case, I dissociated for most of those 16 years. It's like for a person who hasn't experienced childhood trauma, having a bad car accident, you won't be able to remember that accident for a while, because your mind is protecting you from the impact of it, the psychological impact, as much as anything. So if you imagine 16 years of horrendous psychological torture, physical attacks, beaten, kicked, tied up, you know, just horrendous things, as well as the awful sexual abuse, what happened is my mind couldn't deal. So it suppressed those memories so well that it was not until I was a mum and 32 years of age that the memories started to come flooding back. And look, I'm grateful that happened. because I think I would have gone crazy had I actually had full recall at that time.
So, what age were you when the trafficking began?
Right. So from the time I was 4.5, when I was first abused or penetrated by my father, I was then kind of pumped out to his extended family. But it was from that age that my grandmother, his mother, and one of his sisters were designated to train me into being the best child prostitute I could be. And that's abhorrent as a term, but I don't know what else to call it, because that's what it was. Mm-hmm. And so from the age of 6, I was then trafficked out to people who were paying a lot of money to do that to me. And one of the places that the trafficking took place was out of my grandmother's house. Mm-hmm. And her and my auntie, I would see them, my father giving them money. So they got a commission for training me so well. And as I began to grow older, they included more acts, so more sinister things began to happen within that trafficking.
And if you don't mind saying, what was your worst experience?
Okay, so my worst experience was at the age of 11. So my parents had split up and I was living in my father's house. So my mother had taken the other girls and gone, and I was left with him. And there were then no barriers to any torture or anything he wanted me to do, and nearly died a few times. And the worst, when I thought I would die, was he trafficked me out to a gang for an initiation weekend. So in New Zealand at the time, we had 3 gangs. Mm-hmm. And this one still operates today. And what they did to me as an 11-year-old was they tied me up. So my hands and feet were tied on the block, they call it. And these gang members could do whatever they wanted to me. So what I hadn't factored in, and I nearly died, was the brutality, because it wasn't just the sexual attack and all of that. It was also they were beating me. I was so pulverized, Alizee, that my face was unrecognizable. I became unconscious. And I was so badly beaten that when my father came on the Sunday to get me, he turned to the gang leader, and do you know what he said to him? "Oh, she looks terrible. Oh, you probably don't want to do too much of that, mate, because she won't look that good for you anymore." So that's the type of horror that I went through. My father then took me back to my grandmother's house. My whole face was swollen. My eyes were shut with the bruising, broken ribs. I couldn't walk, and I had to stay off school for weeks. It was one of the only times he got a doctor into my grandmother's house, and the doctor happened to be part of the gentlemen's club that I had been trafficked to. Okay. And this is quite a big conglomerate across the world. Mm-hmm. This is quite a big entity with pedophilia and rings that do a lot of this child sexual abuse and a lot of the ritualistic stuff. Mm-hmm. So I recognised this doctor's voice. I couldn't see, I was so badly beaten, but I couldn't see, but I recognised his voice because he was the same doctor that would drug us children when we were trafficked to that group periodically. So yeah, that was the absolute worst time of my life. I'll never forget it. That was just the fear. These were big, big men. But anyway, I survived it. But yeah.
I have several different questions. I don't really know where to begin. Firstly, how can a father dehumanize their child to such an extent they're just seeing them as a way to, like a toy that makes them profit? Not to armchair psychoanalyze or anything, but what was going on there with your father? I mean, he sounds like a psychopath.
Right. So you've got it completely right. What viewers need to keep in mind is this. When you are seen as an object, you therefore don't have, you're not seen, valued, loved, or treated as a child. I was purely an object to him. You're absolutely right. He was a grade A psychopath, and he was a cruel, cruel one. So he didn't have love for me or towards me. I was purely there to make him big amounts of money. All that was important to him was notoriety and hierarchy through the groups and gangs he trafficked me to. It's all he wanted was money and attention.
Is someone like that capable of feeling love for anyone? Or
no,
no, because you can't compartmentalize something that awful.
I remember one act of kindness in all the years, those 16 years. Once I turned 16 and I never had to see him again, I never willingly did, right? But there was one act of kindness, and it was one night, and I remember he tucked my feet up because my feet were cold. That's the only thing I remember that was ever kind. But, you know, that was by far the worst time in my life. I attempted to take my own life 3 times during the 18-month period I was left in that house with him.
When you were 11 to 12, which is that
12 and a half.
Yeah. That to me, it's I don't think I even knew the concept of ending one's life when I was 11 years old. I don't think I actually knew or understood that as a concept. So that you tried three times is horrific. You're a very resilient person. You've got a very strong core to go through all of that and now speak out about it.
Yeah. Well, look, I also think I'm very grateful because I always had a light in me, and I always had a belief that I needed to just put one foot in front of the other. But the big gift to me was I had angels around me, and I could feel them and sense them and talk to them, and you know, I still do today, and it's why my book is called On Angels' Wings, because they got me through. And yeah.
Can we speak a little bit about the gangs? Would it be fair to call some of them cults? Because if you're engaging in this type of behavior, it's rather cultish. And this doctor was a member of this particular, shall we say, cult? I feel like that is a good word for.
Yeah. Look, and that doctor was not just a member of that big entity in New Zealand. I call it a gentleman's club, because they're global and they're huge, and they do a lot of trafficking and ritualistic abuse of children throughout the world, and they're known for it, actually. But what people don't realise is they're infiltrated by people high up in our legal, political, police, government systems, which is why they get free passes when it comes to behaviour like this. And, you know, yes, there was that connection, the gangs or cult were definitely infiltrated by this group, or there was some kind of control that went on. But so was the Roman Catholic Church, and that's where it became a bit of a breeding ground, actually, for some of these groups and members.
Yeah, and you said that some of these experiences were ritualistic in nature.
Yes.
Can you possibly
Yeah.
explain more on
Yeah.
that, the ritual side of things? What was
Yeah.
happening there?
So satanic abuse, and look, I go into it in the book, but not everything that happened, because you know, I don't need to. But there was a certain protocol, and there was definitely a hierarchy with this satanic ritual stuff. And what would happen was the children would be taken to a particular dwelling, and we would be lined up, and we would be checked out by a nurse, and then we would be drugged by the doctor that I mentioned earlier, and then we would be led into the main ceremonial room, and we would be laid out in a circle. So it was all raised platforms and things, but there was a very much a structured look to this. And then the chanting would begin, and these men would come in wearing hoods and specific masks and things. And so the chanting would get louder and louder, and they would start to abuse. The person who was in charge of them all got the first pick, and then they would rotate. But the interesting thing is, it didn't just stay at that. So there were animals and other living things sacrificed as well. And I don't want to horrify your viewers, but blood being smeared and drunk, and just horror. They're very satanistic. So look, I don't want your channel to be taken down.
No, it's fine.
And people struggle with this, but it still goes on today, Alizee. It still goes on today.
Yeah, we've had thousands of years of this type of, I mean, especially bloodletting in like the eyes of a sacrificial offering, some sort of god. That's happened around the world for lots of years. So I don't think it's so far-fetched to believe that there would be remnants of this within certain groups, especially if certain groups, I don't know, are obsessed with certain ideas or want to chase after certain things. I mean, this is going to be a difficult question to answer, but do you know roughly how many of these men would engage in this behavior? Like how big the group would be?
Well, yeah. So look, there could be up to 40, but there were chapters throughout the country, and then periodically they would get together. So May Day was a big one. 1st of May was a big one. And then it would be out in the country somewhere, would be taken out in the country, and police cars would line that driveway. But the point is that, just to be really clear, this organisation is infiltrated with these animals, if you like, but they have to get to a certain level within the hierarchy before all of this pedophilia and abuse starts. So there are some really good men out there who possibly have joined this group, and they feel like they're doing good in the community, and they will be. They just don't know what's happening above them. So
yeah, it's almost not almost like, but a parallel, I suppose, is you have Scientology. I don't want to mention Scientologists too much though, because they get very they like to just follow people around. But the first few levels, it's very much a self-help group and you
Yeah.
take self-help courses and
Yeah.
like to better yourself. And it's only after you get to level 5 you start to learn about the more interesting esoteric stuff.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you were being trafficked out to, am I right in saying, strip clubs?
Yeah, so the strip club, there was just one. It was up in K Road, so that's where our red light district mainly was back then. And there were a couple of nightclubs, and they were just like big houses with 3 stories, say. But I was taken there at age 11 and started being trafficked out of their one of their top rooms. So I wasn't seen by the general public. But the other female prostitute or sex workers knew what was going on and were horrified. And the transvestites that were there knew as well. But that was 11. But prior to that, we would be taken there and have to, some of the filming happened well before I was 11 and went right up till I was 16. So that was a place where some of the filming took place as well.
So the adult sex workers, they were aware what was going on, but they couldn't do anything. They couldn't.
They were trapped, and look,
Yeah.
they were lovely. They were lovely to me, and they tried to look after me as much as they could. And hated my father, hated him.
Sounds like that might have been the first place where you were outwardly shown affection by adults trying to look out for you, which is it's mind-boggling, really. And you were in how many pornographic films was it?
Probably over 100, but they weren't what you think now with a little video camera or digital device. These were the big old projector screens with the big in brown leather cases, and they had the big round wheels. I used to focus on the sound of that whirring as the filming was happening. So and lots of photographs were taken as well, but the police couldn't find the films here, but they know they're there. They just don't know where, and it's so long ago now. I guess I'm just here to say to all our fabulous survivors out there, look, there is hope. There is hope, and you're not alone, and you're believed and supported. I stand beside you. So just want to give people hope. I got through. It's a miracle I'm here. I'm so grateful I made it through. But you guys can too.
So when you were 16 and you weren't legally obligated to see your father, because you did go and live with your mother for a while, didn't you? But then you had to go see him. Was it once every 2 weeks? Like you had to?
So that's a story. Is that worth telling about how I escaped from my father's custody full time?
Yes.
So I'd been in my father's house 18 months and came home from school one day, and I could hear sounds coming from down the hallway, and I could hear a woman laughing. And I went down, and there was my father in bed with a woman, and I just panicked because I'd been conditioned to be his sex slave. Mm-hmm. So it just threw me. And anyway, I picked up my bag and I ran all the way up to my mother's house. And for the first time, something must have showed in my face, because she asked me what had happened. And I told her. And so then she rang. She was friends with the Archbishop of Auckland at the time. She rang the lawyer, and they said the best words I'd ever heard in my life: get her out of that house. It's not safe for her to be living there with an adulterer.
Yeah, like that's the main issue.
Fine for me to be trafficked, sold, abused, neglected, tortured, but not to be with an abuser. Anyway, I was so relieved. I just cried and cried. But then she made me go back and tell him by myself that I didn't want to live with him anymore. She wouldn't even come with me. So I had to face him by myself.
How did he
And
take that?
oh, he said, you'll pay for this. You're making a big mistake. But the point being, I was so traumatized at having to face him. And then I walked out and her car was parked on the road, and I went out and went back to her place, and I was so excited that, oh, it's over, I can finally live with you. And she turned to me and she said, no, you have to go back every second weekend.
Why was that? Why did he get custody of every second weekend? Why did that happen?
No, she didn't want me, to be fair. She didn't want me. Bullshit that the Archbishop and the lawyer said that. I don't believe that for a moment. This was self-interest. Okay. So going back every fortnight for 2 days nearly broke me, because I had 12 safe days, right? I could sleep safely. I was left alone. It was such a relief, but I had to prepare myself to go back into all the trafficking and abuse, and he made sure I worked hard. So interestingly, all the people that he trafficked me to, and all the money he made out of me, and all the things these other men did to me, they were nothing compared to what my father did to me. So he was so deranged and evil. It was fun for him to strip me naked, put a dog collar around my neck, walk me around on all fours, and I could only eat food or have water out of like a dog bowl, and tie me up outside on the back deck. And at one stage, I wasn't allowed to speak. I could only communicate through what a dog would do. So to me, that psychological torture and damage was almost worse than anything physical.
And was your mother aware of the sexual abuse, but didn't care?
Well,
or?
I would say, I have no idea. I think so. You would have to have been deaf, dumb, and blind not to realise there's a really seriously traumatised kid here. Every time she saw me, I would have lost more weight. Mm-hmm. I mean, my father deliberately starved me because the pedophiles would pay more money if I was really thin, because then it made me look younger, you see.
Yeah, I was thinking that, like a infantilization.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but yeah, I don't think she cared enough. I don't think my mother ever loved me either. She was what I consider a complex narcissist. So her world was about her. And what I quickly learned to do in the end was to develop a false self for both parents. And I became the caregiver, because I worked out if I could look after my mother and feed her needs or fill her needs, she might notice me. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And sometimes I get nice words said to me. But that's what I had to do as a child to get any positive attention. So again, pretty amazing to have made it through.
And how would your false self be with your father? Was it about, okay, well, if I just, serve his, in quotations, needs, maybe he won't be as hard on me, maybe he won't hurt me so much?
100%. So I pretended I loved all the abuse and all the attacks. I would try and preempt some stuff. And what happened was, in my childlike mind, that works, because sometimes it did. And he would sometimes be a bit kinder. Now, when I say kinder, that would mean if I was in his presence, I could never eat until he had eaten everything he wanted to, and I got the scraps. So I was treated like an animal, really. And as I say, that was the worst. But the false self and the caregiver in me, I had to survive. So I just adapted who I was to keep breathing, actually, to keep going.
Yeah, and where does that ultimately leave you? Because you're this age, you've got these two false selves just to survive. Where would
Yes.
that you wouldn't, I mean, it's not like many kids like know who they truly are when they're little kids anyway, but if you're having to act out all these roles when you're by yourself, what's that feeling like?
Disaster. Absolute disaster. And I developed it and worked on it and perfected it so highly. I was so highly skilled at this that was the hardest thing for me. I didn't turn to drugs or alcohol as a lot of my fellow survivors have needed to. What I had to do, my biggest trauma, was trying to work out who was I, who am I, who is the real me, because I'd perfected this. So it took me decades actually to finally understand this is who I am, not that false person. I couldn't cry for years. I was a lot older before I cried.
What
Because
yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, just because I had to survive. So I had to put on the smile and be all things to all people. So this highly developed false self became me. And if you like, I then wasn't being the real me, I was being a version of me.
And what helped keep you away from drugs and alcohol? Because like you say, so many victims of these experiences will turn to drugs and alcohol later on to escape from the memories. How did you stay away from that outlet?
Okay, well, my biggest trauma was the falseness. So for them, their biggest trauma may have been trying to deal with it was to go to the drugs. My dealing with it was to try and sort out who the false self was. And I couldn't go to drugs because from a very young age, I was pumped full of barbiturates, hallucinogenics, alcohol. And do you want to know the reason for that? Because no one wanted to waste money on a traumatized and frightened child.
So you sedate the child and they're easier to quote unquote work with.
Yeah, that's the only reason. But I got scared because you can imagine hallucinogenics in a very emaciated, small body.
I can't imagine.
Oh, I remember waking up one night. It's still vivid. It was between the ages of 11 and 12 and a half, living at my father's house. And I woke up one night and I swear to you, I looked at my arms and I had worms crawling out of them and I was terrified. And I thought, what can I do? Who can I go to? And the answer was a resounding no one. And I think in a way that saved me from going down the drug scene because I was too scared. It really affected me.
Yeah, and I suppose like almost counterproductively, like the drugs and alcohol and the feelings of being high or drunk would just remind you of the previous experiences. So it probably would have even served its function as
triggered. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I like to have a few wines, but they're not heavy barbiturates or anything else. I just couldn't do it. It was just too traumatic for me. Hey, and I just want to make a comment in case anyone out there feels offended. Whatever you wonderful survivors out there have had to do to get through, whether it's been drugs or alcohol, you know what? applaud yourselves, because it was your way of coping, and I just honour whatever you had to do. I get it.
Oh yeah, there's no judgment
Yeah.
here for anyone that has or still uses.
Yeah, it's just a nightmare, and it's such a silent endemic. The power of the silence just is so huge, because of the shame, and I just would just love to offer to our survivors, there's hope out there. You're never alone. We've got to hand the shame back, Alizee. We've got to hand it back. Yeah.
So you're 16 when you got away from him. You never had to see him again. What was your life like after that point? Did you but were you still in school? Did you get to finish school and go on to college?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So, teenage years were a blur, really. I started dating my first husband when I was 19. And of course, as survivors do, if it's within a family, so if it's incest, you develop a way of being, or a template. And as I said to you earlier, I think that for a girl, a young girl, we see ourselves through our daddy's eyes. There's poems about this and literature on this. So a girl's self-esteem is formed through how her father sees her. So does that give you any indication as to how I saw myself? I was never going to attract relationships to me where I was held in the high esteem I should have been, or valued or respected. Now, that's not the fault of, my husband. That is just, I couldn't have a healthy relationship. Of course I couldn't.
What did that relationship look like then?
Well, very, dysfunctional. Me keeping as busy and occupied as I could, so I didn't have to think, because I hadn't had any recall at that stage. All I knew was I had to keep moving, had to keep busy, had to keep doing things, because then my mind couldn't rest, and therefore nothing could emerge within me. So it wasn't good for me, and I don't really want to be disrespectful about my ex-husband. It didn't work, and that was, I have to take my share of that responsibility.
Oh yeah, I mean, you weren't taught what a healthy relationship looks like. So,
was.
Yeah, how can you and a lot of relationships, like your first ones anyway, are this learning curve and process of working out boundaries with someone else. So a lot of people's first ones can't, like, I certainly know that my younger relationships were a bit dysfunctional, because you're suddenly in close proximity with someone. You have to learn how to navigate that. So it's a bit dysfunctional at the best of times. But coming from your background, it must have been difficult.
Well, it was, and of course I wasn't going to be able to be, I wasn't my real self either, so it was always a bit of a show. It's taken me years to be who I am, and actually love who I am, which is something survivors can struggle with as well. So look, and the whole purpose for this, is I really, really want to help other survivors out there by showing there's a way. And I've written that first book, and it's a traumatic read. Just attention, viewers, it's traumatic. But I'm also working on my second book at the moment, which is a guide for CSA survivors. So I've got an idea of what it takes to get through. So that's what I'm trying to do.
And Am I right that you were 32 when you first had your first child?
No, I was 27 when I had my first child. But she was 6 years old when the memories started coming.
So when the memories come back, how do you do they come back in drips and drabs, like a bit at a time? Was it this influx? Do you know even what might have triggered the memories coming back in the first place?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, actually, because for survivors globally, we have things called flashbacks, and we have triggers, and we have dissociation, and we have hypervigilance, and we have a whole raft of things that are known to us, and we never have to explain it because we all get it. But the point is, with triggers, it could be standing in a certain part of a room and just hearing a sound, and instantly you're triggered by that sound because it might remind you of something that happened when you were a child. And flashbacks are when you see a situation in your head replay itself. But yeah, all of that. And I was trying to raise 2 small children alone at the time, and so that was another real challenge for me, trying to deal with all the memories. You can imagine 16 years of them.
Was there,
And
when it first happened, was there almost was there a bit of denial?
well,
Like,
there
where's
was
this coming from?
yeah, absolutely. And then they started recurring and coming more and more, and I thought, look, there's something going on here. So I went and saw a therapist and started speaking, and out they all came. So as I say, it took me decades and lots of healing modalities, and still go to therapy as I can or when I need to. But I feel, hand on heart, touch wood, that I'm pretty well there. I'm healed enough to talk openly and confidently about it. So,
Did writing your book help?
well, it was a few things. It was so triggering and traumatic. It was horrible in one sense, but it was so cathartic in another sense. And yeah, really, really good. Really good to release it all out of me, but yeah, pretty tough. I remember one day I thought, right, I'm doing some research for the book, and I'd started writing. So I drove to my old house, my old father's house, where I used to live with my father. And I parked outside, and I walked around the area, walked through my old school grounds. Well, big mistake. What a wreck. I was heaving. I was crying so much. I was just distraught because, of course, I was retracing those steps. So that don't do that, viewers. don't do that. It was a big yeah, it was horrible. And I rang my therapist, and she said, what are you doing? And I went, I'm walking around the area. And she went, never do that again by yourself. I'll come with you. But look, I have to see the humor in things because that's who I am. But yeah.
Yeah, and also, when it's your own lived experience, like you can react how you want, because a lot of us find humor can help. Like there's the saying, I'd rather laugh at a situation than cry at a situation.
Yeah.
For example, how long has your book been out?
So the book came out a year ago, actually, May 2021.
Have any New Zealand officials, police, social workers, politicians, have any of them been made aware of the book? Has anyone contacted you about this? Because it's a Well, it's a horrific case, so it's within the public's interest to know that this type of stuff goes on. Has there been any contact from authoritative figures regarding it?
Zero interest from any of them. No one would publish my book, so I self-published. No one was interested. I've reached out to media multiple times, no interest. Initially, when I published the book, there was one lovely guy called Steve who works for a national paper, and he interviewed me. But it was pretty traumatic for him actually interviewing me. When we sat down, he said, I've read the book and I just don't have any words. But he was lovely to deal with. But yes, apart from him, no interest. Interestingly, people like yourself and people in the UK and the States are very interested in my story. People in New Zealand, not so much.
Why is that? Did New Zealand have their own version of the Me Too movement? Because I feel like that was a bit of a turning point for us, because then these things started getting more attention and people started being more open and talking about this type of thing when the Me Too movement happened. And now, well, like I said, I don't know if I said it in this recording or the other one, the DJ, the very famous DJ in the UK that's come out recently, I mean, that's been picked up by lots of different papers, whereas maybe 20 years ago it wouldn't have been. So why is it that in New Zealand there's not been interest?
Well, I get told things like people don't want to hear it. People don't want to hear a story like that. So my response is always, that's fine, but two things. One, it's true. And two, it still goes on. So I can't make them show interest. In New Zealand, we have this thing we do where people can be really talented here or quite skilled in a particular way, or, have a story like mine, which is highly unusual. And what they'll do is not notice it or not be interested until it gets overseas. And once it starts gaining traction, she's ours or he's ours. And then suddenly there's interest. But I think that's a shame, because to me, that sort of replicates a bit the silence or the conservativeness, or people don't want to hear it because it makes them uncomfortable. But I don't need to tell my story in graphic detail, Alizee. All I'm trying to do is shed light on our 1 in 3 survivors out there. And, I'm talking men as well as women. And I just want to say as well that women don't get a free pass here. There are women abusers as well. We have a lot of fabulous men in our country who have experienced child sexual abuse at the hands of a woman. And I think we need to start normalising that conversation as well, because it's really hard for them to come forward because there's jokes made about it, or no, that can't be true, or mothers don't do that. And I think really if we're going to stand united and stand beside each other in this, we need to offer our male survivors support, belief, encouragement, and I hear you.
Yeah, there's also that stereotype of, well, men, they're always thinking about sex and they're sex crazed. There's no way if a man was offered sex, it could be deemed as assault. There's this like that awful stereotype that permeates a lot of media and culture, like, oh, men are just happy to like get like this expression that's coming to mind, I don't know why, is get their rocks off at any given opportunity. But it's simply not, it's not the case.
No. I mean, I've spoken to a wonderful man who shared with me that he was 15 years old and abused by a female teacher. And he said, Gloria, you're the first person I've ever told. Why? Because people would make fun of it. People think, oh, you lucky thing.
Yeah.
And no, not lucky, traumatized him for the rest of his life. So I think we need that myth blown apart, actually. And, you know, yeah, we're all surviving, and it was never your fault, ever, just never.
So Gloria, you have your podcast channel for
Handing the shame back.
Yep, for you're speaking to other survivors.
Yes.
Which is excellent. And you have your book on Angel's Wings.
My Flight from Trauma to Grace. I've got it here, but I can send you the links anyway.
Yeah, where can people buy that?
So your side of the world, probably best on Amazon. And I, over summer, did the Audible version. So it's in paperback, Kindle, and Audible. People seem to like the sound of my voice for some reason.
It's your accent. I like the Kiwi and Australian
Kiwi
accents. I like that.
But I'll tell you what, that triggered me. Doing the Audible version was tough. Actually,
really?
I found that, yeah, because I've never read it out loud in a production studio. Yeah,
it's different when you're saying things as opposed to when you're writing.
And the thing is, the poor producer in the studio, so I'm in the studio, the headphones on, doing the book, and he's sitting there doing all the graphics and all the things that need to happen with it, and I could see him through the glass, tense and flinch, and he poor guy, I think he was in shock. But yeah, so the book's been written. It is a traumatic read. The second book's on its way, team. Trying to write it, as a guide. It's Flight Path to Healing Guide for CSA survivors. And the Handing the Shame Back is that channel for if any of your viewers would like to be interviewed by me. I'm very gentle and soft. You won't be traumatized. And I offer you this. Yeah. If we do the interview and for any reason you feel uncomfortable, I will treat it as my honour to have had a conversation. It will never see the light of day. Why? Because as children, we never had the choice. As adults, I want to give you the choice. So that's that one. And yeah, so I do write lots of blogs as well. They're on my website, gloriamasters.com, and I will keep doing this work till the day I die, because it's time to give back.
No, I commend you for it. Thank you so much for coming on to my channel and sharing your stories. I know you're at a place where you can talk about it, but it mustn't be easy. It can't be easy to have to, but it's very important. It's very important to be able to talk about this stuff so people feel that they're not alone.
Yeah.
And that they can relate. Yeah. As horrible as it is to relate to something like this, it's important that people know that others have experienced it and managed to grow.
Yeah. So we can get through it, guys. It's a journey, but I promise you it's worth it. So don't give up, never alone.
Yes, thank you so much for coming to my channel. And everyone, I will link everything that Gloria has said, her website and her books, in the description below, so you can go check that out. Thank you guys for watching this video along with us. Make sure you comment, like, subscribe, all of that typical YouTuber stuff. Follow us on Spotify and iTunes, and I'll be back again sometime soon. So thank you very much. Bye.